If I told you that my current build almost exclusively scales physical damage, to deal fire damage, to cause enemies to take chaos damage, without being a poison build, you might think that I'm insane, that I did one too many deliriums and Tang Mazu finally got inside my head. And you may be correct with that. I haven't really looked in there in a while, and he could be hiding somewhere. But that isn't what's going on with this build. This build focuses on a unique item, which for a long time wasn't in a great spot, and that is the Blackflame Amethyst Ring. The ring gives a bonus to fire damage over time multiplier, reduces ignite duration on enemies, adds a chance to ignite, and has the following very interesting line. Enemies ignited by you take chaos damage instead of fire damage from ignite. What this means is that even though your ignite is dealing fire damage, the enemies take chaos damage. So applying exposure won't increase the damage the enemies take. On the other hand, using something like Eber's Unification or Occultist's Void Beacon to reduce their chaos res will. Stacking Wither up will also increase the damage they take, as that causes enemies to take increased chaos damage regardless of source. The Blackflame is a very interesting item, because it's not conversion. The ignite that you have is still dealing fire damage. Instead, it's damage taken as. So when you're putting together a Blackflame build, you can still do increased fire damage over time multiplier, or other scale factors that apply as if you were dealing fire damage, because you are. Whereas when it comes to how you're treating the enemy, causing them to take increased damage, reducing their resistances, or other factors that affect the enemy themselves, that's all chaos damage. Which is why Blackflame Ignite builds are traditionally played on Occultist rather than Elementalist. Elementalist has a lot of great ways to mess with how the enemy takes elemental damage, but it doesn't have as many to mess with how they take chaos damage. Now this video focuses more on the unique item itself rather than my build. If you want to know more about my build, I will be making a full build showcase in the near future, so be sure to sub to the channel and ring the bell to be notified when that's uploaded. For now though, if you found this explanation of how the Blackflame works to be helpful, then be sure to leave a like on the video as it really does help out in the YouTube algorithm. And if you have any uses for the Blackflame itself, be sure to put them down in the comments. For now, I'm going to talk about a few uses that I thought of, including the current build that I'm playing, because one of the best ways to use the ring is in fact as an Ignite build played on Occultist. Occultist already has a lot of very effective ways to mess with an enemy's chaos resistance, which you can further improve if you're using something like the Eber's Unification helmet, which applies Void Gaze that, again, reduces enemy chaos resistance. Something else to keep in mind is Wither causes enemies to take over 100% increased chaos damage, which you can kind of think of as a double shock. This is to offset the fact that you're not able to reduce enemy resistances nearly as low as you'd be able to with something like elemental resistances. Just think about it this way. Exposure from an elementalist can reduce enemy resistances by 40%, and you can double up on elemental curses to be able to reduce enemy resistances by a further 25% or so after some curse scaling. With chaos, you don't really have that. The only curse that you can use is Despair. There aren't other ways to shred enemy chaos resistance. And while there are a few sources of Chaos Pen, those won't affect damage over time like Ignite. Much like Critical Strike Multiplier or Double Damage, Penetration is a stat that modifies hits, not damage over time. And the reason that you might want to do a lot of this is enemies have less chaos resistance than elemental resistance. Therefore, there's a lesser barrier to overcome if you are trying to scale your damage. And Occultist offers a lot of very interesting offensive and defensive benefits, which might mean that you'd want to play it for an Ignite build rather than something like an Elementalist, Trickster, or Chieftain. Not to say those are the only ascendancies where Ignite can be played, but they are by far the most popular. Now, Blackflame does have one other interesting property that I want to highlight, which is that Wither does not expire on enemies ignited by you. In other words, even if you're not playing an Ignite build, but you have some incidental Ignite, and Wither is really, really, really important to your build, and you absolutely can't have it falling off, in theory, you could sacrifice a ring slot to make sure that enemies are always withered. I have seen some niche uses for this, but overall I wouldn't particularly advise it in most cases. Now there is one more somewhat fringe benefit that's very effective when it comes to Blackflame scaling, and that is that chaos damage innately bypasses energy shield. So if enemies have a modifier like percentage of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield, unless they are a specialized enemy such as Kosis or Gravicius, for whom chaos damage does not naturally bypass their energy shield, Gravicius via a Solaris Lorica, Kosis via, who knows, maybe a Shavs, then you're going to completely negate that. It doesn't matter how much energy shield the enemy has, because they're taking chaos damage, not fire damage, and therefore, that damage is going to affect their life directly, rather than the massive amount of energy shield that they now have. This is especially helpful on bosses, and especially helpful for any situation where you don't get to consistently hit the boss due to DPS uptime. Now, for a long time, I wouldn't have said that Blackflame was good. In fact, I would have said that it's one step short. It's missing one little piece. This is because a lot of the skills that were played with Ignite were played with Ignite specifically because they had Ignite multipliers. This changed, and Ignite was kind of reworked as a whole around this. At the same time, another great boon was the fact that Elemental Equilibrium and Elemental Overload were also reworked to not slot together to be part of the Ignite puzzle. For the purposes of this effect, EO was largely irrelevant, as you can still use it with many Ignite skills, but Elemental Equilibrium, providing minus 50% resistance, was simply a barrier that was too difficult for Blackflame to overwhelm. You didn't have enough sources of scaling enemy chaos res to compete with the fact that you could just go fire damage and gain an extra minus 50% on top of all your other scaling from exposure, curses, etc. And in the most recent patch, with the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame jewels, there's even more reason to do something based off of Blackflame. This is because, yet again, Ignite has been further decoupled from specific fire skills. And even if you're playing something like an Elementalist, you can now get Shaper of Flames for all damage ignites, arguably the best part of Elementalist, on a Necromancer or a Cultist, which gives you a lot more options that you didn't have access to before. So this brings in a far better situation than it's been in the past. There are certainly distinct advantages to using it, such as bypassing energy shield, and having an easier time dealing with enemy resistances because you're increasing their damage taken rather than attacking them directly. This also means that you get around the fact that in some maps, you can't inflict exposure. That would significantly damage your ability to descale enemy elemental resistances, but has no effect on your ability to shred chaos res. Have you played a build with the Blackflame in the past? Or do you plan to play one in the future? And if so, how did you go about it, or how do you plan to go about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the comments below, or join the Discord, where you can ask questions, get build help, and hang out with the community. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. They're awesome, and they get to show it by having their name on screen in the credits of all my videos. So if you want to see your name here, be sure to check the link in the description. For more general gaming content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, and if you want a water bottle or a cool shirt, I have a link to my official merch shop in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.